morning. I will be speaking English, if you don't mind. My Spanish is non-existent. I was asked to share with you some thoughts on democracy, liberal democracy, illiberal democracy, and the European Union. How those things look from the perspective of the European Union and from the European institutions. Well, I will start with a very general remark. We have to be very careful with the language. The language we use sometimes and more often does not mean what we might suppose it means. If you look how such words as liberalism, democracy, freedom, pluralism, and so on are being used today, if you look at these very carefully, you will soon realize that there has been some change of meaning. And quite often, the words acquire the opposite meaning. When I read in the media that, for instance, in Poland, we have an authoritarian regime, and I know very well, and everybody who has enough brains will see that the spectrum of opinion in my country is far broader than perhaps in any other country in Europe. That there is less censorship than anywhere else. That the government is less intrusive than most of the European governments. So the word authoritarianism or authoritarian does not mean in the political use what it should mean. Is a kind of invective, right? A word of is an insult, right? Not really a concept of description. And if you take the word democracy, right, or democratic, as you know, I'm a member of the European Parliament. And the European Parliament calls itself the most democratic parliament in Europe, or perhaps in the world. And the practice in the European Parliament is that the opposition, those who disagree with the mainstream, are being surrounded by a cordon sanitaire. That is, they are not appointed to or elected to major functions, positions. They don't have a chance to participate or to exert any influence because they are marginalized. They are simply not elected. I mean, or their amendments are simply rejected. Such a practice does not exist in any. I can't say in any parliament, but certainly it doesn't exist in my country, where the opposition has every right. So something happened with the word democracy. A colleague of mine who comes from the Flemish delegation, but she was born in Africa. She was born in Burkina Faso, and raised, and she knows quite a lot about Africa. She once said that the way the opposition is treated in the European Parliament reminds her of the practice in the Burkina Faso Parliament, right? Or in Zimbabwe Parliament, where the opposition is simply, as I say, ostracized or surrounded by the cordon sanitaire, right? And you can see how the language works. That those people who say that the European Parliament is the most democratic parliament in the world have their minds so manipulated or self-manipulated that they didn't really see what's in front of their eyes. I mean, democracy is a political system in which every party that enters the parliament has a right to take part in the system. And in the European Parliament, the opposition is not allowed to take part in the system. It's pushed outside the system. So it's the opposition. It's the opposite, really, of democracy. But their argument is that we are true Democrats, and the opposition people are not true Democrats. So in defense of democracy, we marginalize those people. So democracy will be better off without the opposition. That's what they think. That's what they say if they are made to say something. You shouldn't really be blackmailed by such words as really democracy or authoritarianism or pluralism, for that matter. You have to, well, just give me an example. Pluralism or liberalism, right? Liberalism is often associated with liberty. Etymological, it comes from Latin. Libertas means liberty. But if a system calls itself by a word stemming from the concept of liberty, it does not mean that the system is in favor of liberty. It's just an operation on the language. To give you an example, if you ask anyone which system is more pluralist, the system in which it is the accepted norm that there are two sexes, male and female, or the system in which there are 50 genders or 45 genders or whatever genders. And the immediate answer would be, of course, if you have 50, 50 is more than 2, right? So if you have 50 genders, the world, the society is more pluralist. Not so. It's quite the opposite. Because if you accept the norm that there are two sexes, if you look at human culture, human history, the division between two sexes is everywhere. In literature, in poetry, in art, as I say, in science, everywhere. And now you make this change and you say, okay, no. That's too restrictive. We will have 50 genders. Now, you have to impose this idea on the rest of the society. You have to reinterpret the entire history, right? Entire literature, beginning with Homer, right, or Aeschylus, all the literature that followed, or you will reinterpret it in such a way as to show how repressive or oppressive the Western culture was, because it was only about Romeo and Juliet instead of, threesome or foursome or whatever. And then people do not believe it, so you have to make them believe it. You have to start very early, preferably in nursery school, to make them used to it, right? to change their minds, to change the language. You have to establish a language police and a thought police. You have to make some changes in the legal system to make certain offenses punishable, which also has an educative function. So you create a monstrous system which is extremely intrusive because it touches everything, right? From your thoughts to the words you use, as I said, the entire history, imagination, right, metaphysics, everything has to be changed. And I said a huge institutional system of institutions is established to enforce this new notion of 50 genders or 40 genders. This is not pluralism, but they say we will make you a pluralist, right? We will force you to become a pluralist. And don't you dare to use male pronouns, right? In order to be a pluralist, you are not allowed to use male pronouns. You cannot use chairman. You cannot say chairman, right? We will forbid you to use the word chairman. To give an example, quite recently, a couple of months ago, the European Commission came up with a document called Guidelines for Communication. It was precisely this. Fortunately, there was uproar of indignation, and they had to withdraw it. But all these things were there. I mean, you cannot say, in order to make the word pluralist, you cannot use the word Christmas. You cannot call your children John or Mary, because John and Mary are Christian names. And if you want to be a pluralist, you cannot enforce the Christian perspective. So your daughter cannot be called Mary. I mean, this is how things are working. So do not be blackmailed by these words. Look for reality which is behind those words. And just a few remarks about the European Union from this point of view. My thesis is that the European Union is a flawed institution, is a defective institution. It was it's a bad political construction. Why is it a bad political construction? Because it ignores the basic political principles that have been worked out throughout Western history. We have managed, in the Western world, we have managed to establish some general rules or mechanism on the basis of which you can build a pretty safe and efficient political construction. And the problem with the European Union is that the European Union does not really care about those rules and breaks those rules. I will give you, I will exemplify it by 3 rules and will tell you how, what the European Union has done with those rules. The first is what you have in every nation state, at least in Europe or in the Western world. You have a constitution. And one of the basic objectives of the constitution is to establish firm boundaries between various institutions, and it's a sort of distribution of power. The constitutions were made in order to say that this and this institution may do this, and that institution cannot do this, they have to do something else. And it's a clear map of competences between the executive, the legislative, the judiciary, but also not only in a horizontal structure, but also vertical structure. You have the government, you have local governments, and the competences between the central government and the local governments are drawn very strictly, because otherwise the system would turn into chaos, right? It would become a mess, and uncontrolled power would emerge. So, especially in a federalist state, like you take, I will not be talking about Spain, but if you take the United States, right? They are states, and each state has its own kind of government or legislative, right? And the boundaries between what belongs to the federal government and to the state government, to the state system, these boundaries are very firm, right? They are very precisely described in the Constitution. Now let's go to the European Union. And if you read the first Article 1 of the Treaty of the European Union, you will find out that the European Union is in a process of an ever closer union. In other words, European Union is in a process of increasing integration. If you read carefully, and this is the phrase, ever closer union, is a phrase that is used very, very often in the media, but also by the politicians, but also in the legal documents. So what this notion of ever closer union means is that the boundaries of competences are fluid. Is an encouragement to give more power to the central institution, is an encouragement to centralization, which means that everything that follows in the Treaty of the European Union is of secondary importance. Because if you break those rules, if you grab more power, if the European institutions grab more competences, what the heck? I mean, sooner or later, it's going to happen anyway. So why not now? This is the politics of fait accompli. And we often get irritated that the European Union increases its power through the back door, so to speak. And all the European institutions are doing it. So they support each other in this process. Article 5 of the Treaty of the European Union enumerates the principles that should block this process: subsidiarity, proportionality, and conferral, which means that European institutions have only those competences that have been explicitly attributed to them by the treaties. Not once in the entire history has the European Court of Justice ever criticized or stopped the other European institutions for grabbing more power, for violating Article 5. Not once. Why? Because the European Court of Justice has been doing exactly the same, right? And in nation states, very often happens that the constitutional courts say, no, no, no. They say to the parliament, to the government, no, you cannot do it, right? It's too much, right? If you now imagine the United States and the American Constitution having this phrase of an ever closer union, it would mean that gradually in Texas there would be less and less Texas and more of Washington DC, right? That would never happen. I mean, anything can happen, of course. But if you make a thought experiment, I mean, that would create an outrage because the states are defending their competences, right? And the federal government doesn't really dare to go beyond the center line. Whereas in the European Union, it's the other way around. Go ahead, do it, right? Enjoy yourself. So this is the first thing that should be done if you reform the European Union is just cross out, scrap, throw away Article 1 and forget about the ever closer union. As I often say, this is the atomic bomb. I mean, once you have it, you're done. So this is the first principle that is violated. The second principle that violated is also connected with the distribution of power. Is the question of democratic legitimacy, which individuals or institutions have more power in a democratic system? The answer is those that have a stronger democratic legitimacy. Of course, the strongest political legitimacy have those institutions that have been selected or elected by a popular vote, right? Universal suffrage. If you take the example of the president of the state, the presidents of the states that are elected through a popular vote have a very strong position and have a lot of power, like the president of France, the president of the United States. Extremely powerful people, right? Because they have strong, wide democratic legitimacy. If you have the presidents that are elected by the parliaments, they have very weak political legitimacy. That is their power. The function is representative, ornamental, shall we say, like in Germany, right? The German president does not really have any significant power, no power at all, practically. Or in Hungary, right? President of Hungary is also rather symbolic function. Now let's go back to the European Union. One of the most important European institutions is the European Commission. European Commission is a sort of government. It's an executive power, right? It's a kind of European government. And how is it elected? How is it established? Through the Parliament. It's the European Parliament, right, that elects the European Commission in its entirety. So, from the point of view of democratic principles, European Commission should have a very limited power, whereas in fact, it's the other way around. Immediately, right, after the Commission is elected, the commissioners or the president of the Commission become super ministers, right, and super president, and the president of the Commission is kind of super president or super prime minister, and you have 27 or 26 right, European ministries, so to speak, plus the president of the Commission. And this non-elected or elected through the European Parliament bureaucrats are telling the democratically elected governments what to do. You cannot do this, you must do this. Moreover, they censure them, they blackmail them, they reprimand them. Sometimes they give orders to the constitutional courts. I mean, this is simply disgraceful. I mean, that cannot happen. Of course, those commissioners know which countries they can blast and with which countries they should be rather careful. They are very careful with the big guys, and they are very heavy-handed and arrogant with not so big ones. But as I say, they like to bully, and that happens more and more. It was, I think, from the beginning, the problem was there, but it became very conspicuous with Jean-Claude Juncker, who said right at the beginning that his commission, it was the previous president of the commission, that his commission was political. So you have European Commission, which was supposed to be a rather technical, managerial body, became a political institution with very weak democratic legitimacy and with growing ambitions. And something has to be done with it. This growing role of the European Commission has some grounds in the treaties. At one point, I think it was Article 17, as far as I remember, it says that the European Commission is the guardian of the treaties. European Commission cannot be the guardian of the treaties. The institution with such a weak democratic legitimacy cannot be the guardian of the treaties. Especially the executive branch of the government cannot be the guardian of the treaties. It has to be the servant of the treaties, not the guardian of the treaties. Because as the old Roman saying goes, who will guard the guardians? So this is the second principle that has been violated and has to be changed. If you want to reform the European Union, this has to be changed. And the third one, and the final point I want to make, and the example will be the parliament, right? The legislative branch of the government, right? You have a parliament in any country, and the idea of the parliament is representation. Right? Since it is an indirect democracy, we are not like in the Greek agora that all citizens, could take part in governing. So we select or we elect our representatives, the deputies, the members of parliament, and sometimes we like what they do, sometimes we don't. So if we don't like what they do, we will not vote for them anymore. And then it changes with the coming new elections. So it's a very simple mechanism. Of course, it's not working properly everywhere. We all know the problems with the parliament. But the principle is very simple, and it's a sound one, right? Which may be called responsibility or accountability. Our representatives are accountable to us. If they do not do the job properly, we will say, thank you, no, you have to change the job, seek some new appointment, we will never vote for you again. Very simple, very efficient. Now take the European Parliament. Yes, all of them are elected, but they are not accountable. No accountability whatsoever. We have, the Poles, right? Poland has about 50-something, right, members of the European Parliament. The total number of deputies is about 700. So roughly in the matters referring to Poland, you have only 50-something members that are accountable and 650 that are not accountable at all. I mean, they might just as well vote about the problems of Mozambique. And they do quite often, right? They make resolutions criticizing the legal system in the American state of Texas. Why not? So that makes it a parody of parliamentarism. No accountability at all. So you might just imagine what kind of crazy ideas enter the minds, because there is no discipline. No discipline. Accountability is also this disciplinary function. I cannot really be too crazy about what I'm doing in politics, because I will be rejected by the voters. But they can afford to do it. The idea of the European Parliament, at the very beginning, the European Parliament was a kind of funny institution. Margaret Thatcher called it a Mickey Mouse Parliament. I mean, they meet, they talk, who cares? But then this Mickey Mouse Parliament became stronger and stronger. Fortunately, it does not have the legislative prerogative yet. But the demand is, and it was the wisdom of those who wrote the treaties not to give a legislative prerogative to the parliament. A legislative prerogative to the body that is not accountable, that is elected but not accountable, is extremely dangerous. But the real function, the real objective of the European Parliament is to make a European nation, is to produce, to generate a European nation. And the European nation does not exist, probably will never exist. So this makes this institution very arrogant and I would say even insolent, because there are no barriers they should follow. When I mentioned the two principles, first two principles, I said that this has to be reformed. And I can imagine a reform of the European Commission and a general system, Article 1. I can imagine that. I cannot imagine a reform of the European Parliament. It's an institution that should go, simply. Since there is no European nation, there is no room for European Parliament. This institution should be dismantled. And I will be happy if you say that tomorrow there is no European Parliament. I would just applaud and go home.